started. As I said, this session is being recorded and there's lots of different ways to engage. You can have your cameras on or you can have your cameras off. You can engage by communicating in the chat if you like to, or throughout the session, just raise your hand. Welcome to our March 2026 HERDSA SoTL SIG session, Designing SoTL Research for Impact. Our presenter today is Dr. Jo-Anne Kelder, and Dr. Jo-Anne Kelder is an adjunct senior researcher in the College of Sciences and Engineering at the University of Tasmania. She has led institutional and national projects focusing on quality assurance of curriculum and enhancing student experience, as well as research to develop staff capability and practice in curriculum evaluation and scholarship. She contributes as an AAUT assessor, editor of Advancing Scholarship and Research in Higher Education, and the Journal of University Teaching and Learning Practice. She is director of the Open Access Publishing Association and provides higher education services through Jo-Anne Kelder Consulting. Her focus and experience are developing academic capability to embed scholarship and research-informed teaching into course curricula, writing collaboratively for publishing impact, and providing review services for grants and awards applications. Could you join me in welcoming Jo-Anne Kelder, please?
That's very nice. Wow. So is it time to start now, Sue? That's right. Sorry, I was a bit...
Really, over to you.
Okay, sorry, I was just a bit overwhelmed by all those claps. So thanks everyone for being interested in what I have to talk about today, and I hope it's useful and relevant. Perhaps you'd like to just put in the chat where you're joining from today, if you know, and I'll just read out an acknowledgement of country that comes from Lutruwita, Tasmania. So I acknowledge the Palawa Pakana peoples, the traditional custodians of the land upon which I live and work. I honour their enduring culture and knowledges as vital to the self-determination, well-being and resilience of their communities. Acknowledging also all the different communities that you are with. Thank you. Next slide, please. So today, the structure of this talk actually, or presentation actually represents the structure of a way of thinking about building in and embedding scholarship of teaching and learning into your teaching practice. And I've got, I like alliteration, I guess. So designing, doing, disseminating and documenting are the four main topics that I'll be talking about. So designing, the planning, considering feasibility, ethics, but also the warrant for any research that you plan to do. So is it worth doing? Is usually something that we don't often apply, but it's worth doing. In terms of doing, shifting from a more ad hoc, opportunistic approach to SoTL research to building in a sustained, purposeful execution that's embedded with planning or comes out of planning. The disseminating is the key to that, I think, is disseminating knowledge at every stage of your research. Like when it's very new and conceptual, there's still opportunities to disseminate, to build awareness of what you're doing and drawing collaboration if that's suitable. And then in terms of documenting, I'm going to be encouraging everybody to shift beyond just chucking stuff in a drawer or a digital folder that's the equivalent of a drawer. If anyone's, so when you go to do a fellowship, an award application, or any kind of tangible output from what you do, having a system for documenting so that you have an evidence trail for your impact that can then feed into things like grant applications, awards, and journal articles. Okay, so if we go to the next slide, and then, so this is designing before main points that are, or 3 points that are just there, and just the whole emphasis is that design is where you start if you want to have high quality publication outputs. And so next slide, please. So in terms of planning, and I expect a lot of this will be very familiar to everybody, but one of the things that I have found is sometimes when you're coming particularly from a disciplinary focused research and trying to translate what you already know into scholarship of teaching and learning research, it's actually helpful to remember that the elements of a good research plan apply irrespective of the focus. So thinking about what's your research problem, having a well-defined problem, well-defined scope, making sure that you have a theoretical framework that's grounded in literature or some kind of model. And these are things that as an editor in ASHRAE, and before that, the Journal of University Teaching and Learning Practice, is often something that's missing in SoTL research. Research questions, they come out of your problem, out of the literature, where if you identify a gap or an opportunity to extend and explore further. And there's a really good article in JUTL that I'll recommend later, that the idea arc process, which really is an important resource if you want to really think carefully about what are your research questions, so that there is an arc that follows all the way through to the final text that you submit as a research paper.
So you've just got a little bit more quiet. If you could either come a bit closer or speak up a little bit. Thank you.
Is that any better? Yeah.
A little bit, yeah.
I'm leaning into my phone. It feels a bit weird, but hopefully it's okay. Yeah, so, and then thinking about, based on your research questions, what's the data that's relevant and feasible to collect that will enable you to answer your research questions? What are the methods that are suitable for the kind of data that you're collecting, and also the methods for analysis? So there's often in SoTL publications that are submitted that I review or am part of an editorial process. There's just a lack of alignment all the way through those different elements in your research. And often I think if there was a plan, then you can identify gaps in advance and fill them in. I think also you need to think, just as for a grant application, you need to think about, well, what do we expect will be the outputs, the outcomes, and what do we expect we will be able to disseminate? And, outputs and outcomes are kind of a bit fuzzy in lots of our thinking, but for me, I think of outputs as like the tangible outputs, which might be a journal article, but might be, a resource that you develop. The outcomes are more what's the impact, the emerging flow-on effects of your research. And then it's really helpful to have a schedule of activities and milestones, and to think about the resources that you need to operationalise your research plan. And my own research practice has always been collaborative, lots and lots of people doing different parts of the jobs as they have motivation and opportunity. And so I really encourage, particularly for SoTL research, it's much better when it's done with a group of people working together, because you get much better data, much better ideas, and spreading the load means it's much more feasible to actually produce things like a research paper. Okay, and so a kind of publication tip, I'll be giving you a couple along the way. If you consider your research plan as a first draft of your research paper, it maps directly onto an ethics application, because when you fill out an ethics application, all of the sorts of things that you need to put into an ethics application are actually all the sorts of things that you need to put into a research publication. And so you get a good set of information that can then be just put into a plan for a research publication. And so it's always helpful, I think, to write your plan with that dual purpose in mind, that it's all of the elements just get used and reused and arranged in different ways, depending on the purpose of what you're writing. And that I find is really a good way to save some time, and also to keep your mind clear on what you're trying to do. Okay, so next slide. In terms of having a plan, it's really helpful to evaluate prospectively. Is it, is this plan good? Is it feasible? Do I have the resources, the time, the members in a team? Is it ethical? And you need to think about the ethics at the design stage, not as an afterthought. The so what test, is it worth doing? Who will be interested? Think about who is the audience for what your research outputs. Think about the expected outputs versus outcomes and have an understanding what the difference is. And then think about your expected impact. At what scale can you expect to impact? It might just be your students. It might be a course. It might be a faculty or a school. And it might go beyond your school and your faculty to your institution, or even multi-institutional impact. And there's a diagram called the Impel ladder that's really useful for thinking through where is the impact I can expect to have, and what might I do to build the impact into something more. And so another publication tip is that this prospective evaluation directly informs your discussion section when you come to write your paper. So it's really good to start thinking about now, what's the really important things, the good things that that we can expect to come out of our research that will be interesting to put into a discussion that excites people reading it and makes them think, yeah, we could do something too. Okay, next slide, please. So ethics approval. I always recommend seeing the ethics committee as your best friends, because they're the ones who are like a full free troubleshooting of your research plan. And so you always need to think about the ethical implications and problems that need to be addressed. And I think if you have when you put your research plan through an ethics lens, they should be completely aligned. So whatever goes into your application should go into be in your research plan. And I've become aware that ethics committees are now actually requiring a research plan as part of what you have to submit. And it's also good to put a dissemination strategy in your ethics application. It's kind of they're wanting to know, well, that's like, what is the expected benefit to the participants or to the community or to whoever, and your dissemination strategy needs to be aligned with that and can be informed by it. And the publication tip is you must have ethics approval, and you must include the approval details in any peer-reviewed publication. Like, it might just be the number, but as editors, we find, not so much at ASHRAE, but in Juttle and other places, papers are retracted for lack of an ethics approval evidence. So really important to make sure you've got it before you start doing the research. Thanks. And the next slide, please. This is a bit of a romp. Sorry, it's meant to be like a 2-hour workshop. So thanks, Tracy. That's a good comment. Yeah. Okay, so doing the research. And this is where, if you've got a plan, you can follow it. Now, I've always taught my children a plan is not a promise. It's a very helpful parenting tip I'm giving you there. Because when you say, I think we'll go out for ice cream, and then it doesn't happen, and your kids say, is that a plan? Or was that a plan or a promise? And you can always say it was a promise. There were things I couldn't plan for that happened. So I think COVID-19 is the ultimate example of whatever people had as plans, whether or not they had a plan, everything got thrown up in the air and everyone had to adapt. Normal research plans don't have so much disruption, but you still need to be able to adapt, revisit and review when something significant happens. And you actually have to feed that into your ethics application too. So changing team members is an obvious one. But, maybe something that you plan to do can't happen because it just doesn't happen for various reasons. So it's good to have regular progress discussions with your colleagues, which also, can be in your ethics application, and keep evaluating and adjusting the plan as you need to. And then in terms of reports and publications, you've got the planned ones, but often there's also opportunities that come up that you weren't expecting. And so you might decide as a team or a couple of individuals to down tools and go, okay, this grant application's here, let's go for it, or this, and then we can extend an aspect of our plan. So it's just being aware of what's coming up that you weren't expecting, but also working steadily on the basic plan. And I think also in your plan, you should have awards, grants, and promotion applications as part of that plan, because that affects how you think about documenting as well. So the documentation that works, that is part of just the natural data of a research project, can also be documentation for the team to do an award application or grant, and indeed promotions are also, sometimes you can get some really good information that you can give as evidence. Okay, so next slide, please. Ethical research management. Oh, I forgot to say, yeah, there we are. So ethical research, there's so much information. There's the national statement, there's institution codes of practice. The main goal is academic integrity, being upfront and transparent about what you're doing. Ethical research management also involves the team organisation, like how you allocate tasks, not overloading one person. And also it's about authorship. So any dissemination that you do, it's very important to have upfront understanding of what constitutes authorship, what constitutes a contribution. And, there's COPE guidelines, there's all sorts of guidelines where they tell you what actually constitutes contributions, and you can make that as part of your team management, that you say, we will abide by the COPE guidelines, or we will abide by the national statement of research in ethics. And then if somebody is, if there's a dispute, you've got an external reference point to manage the discussion with. And the other thing is, using the reports to research ethics committees on the progress, amendments and breaches. That's another kind of really useful point of working out, of managing the research and making sure that the research is progressing well. Okay, so next slide. So it's really helpful, I think, to work within a community of practice. And I often think it's like the education research version of a scientific laboratory team. It's when you build up a culture of collaboration and working together, it's actually the fun part of being an academic, I think. It's a context in which you can do peer support and peer review within the team. And there's also, so that's within a research team, but also having an outward-looking approach where you think about conferences, especially interest groups, anything that is about building awareness of what you're doing, invitations to other people to collaborate with you, and perhaps do a comparative study in another institution. It all means that as you build data and analysis over time, you have a much more substantial evidence base for whatever you want to publish. Okay, and so that publication tip would be that collaborative research increases the scope, scale, and generalizability of a research project, all of which increase its publishability. So that's a really good one to think about. Okay, next slide, disseminating. So just going to talk a little bit about that. So the next slide, please. Thinking about what is dissemination. Like, first thing is a dissemination plan is really important because it actually provides, especially if it's got milestones, it actually gives you like an incentive to meet, to write, or to analyze. Like it just helps. And it's the place where you codify knowledge for others to apply, adapt, and build on. And so, and that can be so many different ways. But any output and any outcome is a candidate for dissemination. So you can, you know, organise for a group of people in your school to come and hear what you're doing. Like, it's being proactive about dissemination is really important in terms of building your capabilities and your reputation and your opportunities for collaboration. And so just noting that dissemination's an output and impact is for your research is an outcome of dissemination. So you need to think, if I want to have impactful scholarship of teaching and learning research, then I really need to tell people about it. So you need to be very, perhaps for some of us, it's a little bit harder, but be quite excited about what you're doing. Think about what are the important things that are, you know, likely to interest people, and think about different ways that you can get people to know about. Oh, sorry, the sound down. Is that better? It's not. How's that? Is that better?
A little bit better, but still a bit quiet.
I'll see if I can turn it up a bit. No, oh, I'm closer again now. It's a bit
Really join us, Jo.
Okay, so next slide is just a list of different kinds of opportunities that I could think of, just off the top of my head often. But you can see there's the formal, there's peer-reviewed ones, there's where you might be invited as an expert. I got a huge shock the first time somebody asked me to come and give a talk. It was like, oh. But then there's also lots of informal methods with, you know, where you get together with fellow like-minded academics. Then there's where you can connect with practitioners, and maybe you can actually provide resources that are useful for practitioners. There's the digital places. I think someone was mentioning before, like using those is quite helpful. And then the in-person, which I think is, you know, that's probably the best one for if you like talking with people, because that's where you get a lot of interaction and get a lot of ideas. So a publication tip from me is to plan dissemination from day one, include target journals and conferences into your plan, and hone your research narrative through informal dissemination before submitting to journals. So I always see any kind of informal or semi-formal is an opportunity for me to rework what I'm wanting to talk about and to get it a bit better, a bit more simple, clear, and able to adapt it to different audiences. You become more aware of what different people, different kinds of audiences will respond to. Okay, so next slide. We're doing documenting, and this is where one of the things that I have done, which I think has been quite helpful just as an organising principle, is to pick a model or a set of criteria that, and in this case, the Australian Awards for University Teaching criteria. That one has 4 criteria and descriptors that basically, if you can get in the highly recommended column, that means you've done really good research over about 3 years. So I just picked that and reverse engineered and say, okay, if I want to be able to do this in 3 years, what do I need to do now and ongoing for 3 years to be able to write that award application, which also works for a grant application, which also works for a publication. So Documenting is different from disseminating. It's your evidence base. And the AAUT awards criteria are quite useful because they require evidence of sustained impact, and their primary over several years, and their primary focus is impact on students, which is the primary focus of scholarship of teaching and learning as well. And so it's really helpful to start documenting right from the beginning instead of trying to retrospectively find your evidence. It's very helpful as a kind of an organising principle as well, because it really keeps you focused on the students, and it keeps you focused on research questions that are about what is going to enhance students' learning experience, their actual learning or their outcomes. So that's helpful. So if you look at slide 17, that's just got the 4 criteria, A to D, and you can see student impact, recognition by peers, community or discipline, creativity, imagination and innovation, and then scholarship, which is engagement with literature and contribution to the body of knowledge and peer-reviewed outputs. And I think just on the scholarship one, I want to say, like, it's in terms of research papers, but also awards, just popping in your standard Biggs and Tang or something is not evidence that you've engaged with the literature. So when you're writing an award application or a research paper, making sure that the literature that you are referencing actually is deeply connected into how you formulated your research questions or how you understood the problem, what gap you're addressing, how you understand the data that you have analysed. So because literature can be giving you, like, this is what we know now, but also literature can inform your method, like how you do your method. You can justify that from the literature. So, okay, so if we go to the next slide. So what you need to do is be quite to interrogate your research plan to say, will it actually deliver evidence of impact on students? And you need to think about, well, what's the data we're already collecting for research purposes? Or actually you can also, what is the data that we're just collecting anyway, like to do our end of semester reports, because that is all data that is potentially extremely useful for answering your questions. And then mapping it to the criteria is just a way of organising it. Like, you can pick your own criteria, but the AAUT criteria, if you've got a whole lot of evidence that maps to, this is really good for evidencing that our research has had an impact on students. The B, recognition by peers. Well, that's easy. That's just all the letters and emails and, invitations to speak. They're a bit easier. Creativity, imagination, innovation, that's actually a little bit more difficult to think about. What's the evidence that I've been doing more than business as usual? And so it's worth thinking about that and trying to think what tells somebody that what we're doing is quite extraordinary. And then I do recommend that you design a system for documenting both routine and unexpected evidence of impact. I know it's really hard, and I know we usually end up with just chucking it all in to some spot where we'll look at it later. But if as a research team you meet and say, okay, what evidence have we got? And as part of the meeting, you chuck it into whichever box of evidence you're looking at. That will be helpful, I think. Okay, so all of this evidence that you're collecting, like the natural data that you collect that just is generated by being a teacher, being a teaching team that's, responding to students, their assessment tasks, their emails, that's all there. You can actually build that into an ethics application as being able to be used for research purposes. But it's also, so thinking about data as like it's what is just there naturally, and then what's the additional data that I want to explicitly look for and collect that fills any gaps and makes it more obvious about what we've done. Okay, so and it can be used, and all of this evidence, can be used for multiple purposes, for award applications, for grants, for publications, but also it can feed directly, and should it feed directly into your curriculum design, into your teaching delivery design, like that. So it's basically trying to link and leverage what people who love teaching and love supporting their students do anyway, and thinking about it as it's also something that I can use for other purposes. Okay, so next slide, please. Right, so we've gone designing, doing, disseminating and documenting rather rapidly, but I hope you can hear. So I just want to go through a few more things and then we'll have a chat activity. So next slide, please. Okay, so these are just some like ways of thinking that I've developed over time. This one was part of a national Australian Council of Deans of Science project that I did with Professor Tina Kuna. And it's a way of thinking about your curriculum that says, okay, the relevant unit of analysis really is the course, because course learning outcomes are what accreditation people look at, and course is every unit or subject within a course is only as important as it contributes to the course learning outcomes. And then to think about the fact that every curriculum course level has about a 5-year life frame where after that it needs to be completely refreshed. And so if you think in terms of life cycle of a course, and you think that in the beginning of a course, it's mainly quality improvement. Once it's mature, it's mainly quality assurance. And then at various points along the line, the scholarship of teaching and learning, the publications, the scholarship part of it can be particularly, you can really move into writing when you've got, say, 3 years of data for journal articles, but there's a lot of dissemination you can do when you're doing quality improvement, like research in progress or conceptual papers, articulating what exactly is it we're trying to do in this curriculum transformation. What's our literature? What's our plan? And then later on you can do another dissemination where you talk about what's happened. Thanks. So next slide, please. And the ACDS website, Teaching and Learning website, has a link to that you can check it out a bit more. Another way of thinking about, there's this massive stuff that you're engaging with. One is to think about curriculum. Okay, so there's all sorts of different levels of curriculum that you can consider that might be where you have the opportunity to do some data collection and research in. There's all sorts of people that you might engage with to do that, not just your participants. There's also a whole lot of different activities that go into a well-designed plan for research, which include your evaluation plan and your dissemination plan. And it just is about thinking about what do I need to organise and plan for, what activities, so that we can get to the end and do and have the outputs that we want. And then the impacts, those four there are the criteria for the AAUT, but I think you'll find they're also the criteria for just about every other academic research you do or activities that you do in relation to your teaching curriculum. Okay, so next slide. We look at the evidence of impact. So next slide. So this is where the Impel ladder is quite useful. And if you see the circle that I've drawn around, most of us get to maybe level 4 in terms of impact, which is where narrow opportunistic adoption is where, it's you've done something and someone who knows you or someone hears you give a talk at a symposium and they go, oh, can I do that too? So that's opportunistic and it's just you and another group. The kind of goal might be to eventually transform a whole curriculum. Or, I have some people, I've read some AUT awards where people have actually done such good work that what they did for their topic or their unit was then rolled out across the whole faculty eventually. So you can think about what's the scale of potential influence that I have, and how can I grow that? But also, what are the steps I would like to take if something I've done is really worthwhile? How can I disseminate so that it becomes something that people actually choose to adopt and systematically adopt it? So you want like your dean of your college to say, we're going to do this on every course in our college. That shows really good impact. But you might be content just with one subject and someone in a kind of parallel subject says, oh, I'm going to do that assessment task that you've designed too, because it looks really good and the students seem to respond well to it. Thanks. Okay, so next slide. So here's thinking about the AAUT criterion, and what I've done there is just list some of the different sorts of data or data collection sources that you can take. And you can see, for students, there's institutional data is actually quite a key one. But you can also do some solicited data, like a focus group or your own surveys. The difficulty is always balancing time and money and other resources you need to do things in addition to what is already collected by your university. But you also get the unsolicited data, like someone sends you an email, or I don't think they do cards anymore, but it's probably showing my age. Similarly for criterion B, you can see there's a lot of different sort of sources of evidence that you're having an impact, that people are recognising what you're doing. NTROs is non-traditional research outputs, which a lot of universities are accepting now as being evidence that you're actually doing lots of work that's recognised. Next slide, please. Yeah, and so for C, imagination, creativity, innovation, I think it's appropriate to your context. So what's imaginative and creative in your context, might not be in another context, but particularly, so for example, if you're doing something, if there's a curriculum design that's kind of pretty standard, you see what someone else is doing, you think, oh, that's really good. And then you take that, and then your creativity, imagination, and innovation is in how you contextualize this idea into your context. So it can be about that. It's also about the kind of influence that you have. So you show the creativity and the innovation by the fact that people recognise that that's what it is. It's not just business as usual. And you also show it through impact on students, so their learning, their engagement, and their learning experience. So that one is worth thinking through quite a lot, because basically, if you're doing SoTL research, generally, to be worthwhile, you would want to have something that's innovative, something that's creative, something that people go, oh, that's really great, that's amazing. And so that's why it's worth putting a bit of effort into that. And then for scholarship, you have evidence of that from, you've contributed to the body of knowledge through publications or symposiums that you run. Then there's also about the institution. If you have influence on that. You demonstrate scholarship by your engagement with the literature, making sure that what you're doing is evidence-based, and making sure that your research your scholarship is that everything you do in relation to curriculum or how you deliver your teaching is really planned. It's evidence-based, it's grounded in theory, it's quality assured, and it's about continuous improvement. And that's why, you know, the AUT look for 3 years of sustained effort and improvement, which is, in their view, a significant element of what constitutes really good scholarship of teaching and learning. And then you also, you know, you might, with academic communities, just contributing through informal and formal presentations. Thank you. Next slide. Right, so now we get to do a chat activity, and because I'm on my phone and I keep getting quiet, I'm not quite sure how this is going to work, but I was thinking if you can use the chat, and for this question, just write your answer to what evidence, and think about either a research project you've got or one that you might have, and think what evidence will your research produce or could you easily collect that shows positive impact on student learning or experience. So it's just what is the data you could collect, not thinking about, you know, whether it might show negative impact actually. But can everyone just put one example in the chat? And I can't see anything. Oh, there we go. Yep, student feedback. Surveys. Yep. Yep, assessment grade. Yeah, tracking grade improvement. Improve skills. What would be the data that would show that? That might be, yeah, retention improvement. Yes. On the reflection students, right, it's actually really helpful if you design your assessment tasks so that they actually show evidence of what you are looking for. So, you know, giving them a lot of multiple MCQs is not going to really show you change in attitudes, for example. So if you want to really look at something that's a little bit tricky to collect data on, or your institution doesn't collect that data, then assessment tasks are a really great place to do that, because it's actually, and it's legitimate, because, you know, your assessment tasks are meant to evidence learning. So you think about what is it that I want them to know, understand, and be able to do. Then what assessment do I need to design so that I can tell if they have attained that knowledge, that capability, and if it is improving over time or when I've made a change. So that's good. Okay, thank you. So the next slide, please. Okay, so now we're thinking about recognition. How might your research generate recognition beyond your own classroom? Yep. Yep. We're still talking about criteria A, I think. Yes. Good ideas. But how do you know if your peers acknowledge that you're the go-to person for something? You know, I remember I was called the ethics queen once because I happened to be very competent in ethics. And so if anybody, so that, I don't know how you'd put that into an award application, but yeah, just like I was called the ethics queen, and people would constantly come and say, can you please have a look at my ethics? Yeah. Yes, thanks. Academic presentations. Yep. Yeah, advice. There's one something that I was involved with. There's a whole team, and we applied for an award with the Australian Computing Society because we did an online learning course, and we won that. So that was recognition beyond the university. There's teaching awards, obviously. Any others people have? No. Okay, let's go on to C, because we've still got a bit to go. Okay, what about how can you demonstrate what's genuinely innovative or creative? Like what sort of data could you collect or evidence could you use? Yep. Industry engagement in redesign. Yep. And you've got to think, so sometimes something that's innovative one year and then everybody does it, it's no longer innovative, it's business as usual. So it's quite tricky, this one, to make sure what you're doing is actually out of the box. Not, yeah. Benchmarking data, yeah. Something that solves a no problem. Yeah, LMS usage. Yeah, I think, but in terms of creativity, it's probably a little bit more qualitative, I think. Yeah, because it's not something new, usually that's measured. If it's something new, it's rarely measured. Yeah. Okay, how about we go to the next slide and think about scholarship. So which one or two scholarly sources are most central to your research plan? Or what gap would you like to address? We're still in C. I'm just aware of the time. So can we just have a couple of things that are about scholarship, and then we'll move on to the last little bit, because I want to give time for any questions. Yeah. So any target journals? I can recommend Advancing Scholarship and Research in Higher Education as a very, it's not yet ranked, but it's a HERDSA journal. It's very developmental in its approach. You get very good feedback, and you can do research in progress or non-traditional submissions, so not just your basic article. And we also do peer group review. So you get 4 people put their eyes on your paper and have an hour discussing it. So you really do get a lot of care and attention. Teaching Learning Inquiry Journal, yeah, that's the Aristotle one. There's Journal of University Teaching Learning Practice. It's quite hard to get into now. It's gone to Q1, and the editor-in-chief told me he gets, I think, 700 submissions a year, and I think their acceptance rates, like to go to review, is like 5 to 10%. So you want to have a pretty solid paper to go there. But with ASHRAE, you can do we still look for high quality. So we would look for good research plan, good philosophical underpinning, adequate literature, like good literature survey, and the method. But in the research in progress, when we don't require so much like a substantial body of data that you've analysed, it's more an opportunity to say, here's some interesting things we've preliminarily found out, who would like to join us and maybe replicate what we're doing and see if it works, if it's generalisable. Okay, so we go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so this is just a summary of the kind of scattered through the talk. And I think, it might be useful. I think you're going to get a copy of this so you can see it later. But I think there's a lot of things that if you are aware of them, it just can prevent a waste of time perhaps. And I think I don't think I put in become a journal reviewer. It sharpens your own writing and shows you what editors want. And I think when you're writing a research paper, it's very helpful to think, what will a reviewer be looking for? And you can look at your target journal and see what they ask the reviewers to look for and make sure you've met that standard. And all of the information about the scope and journal scope and aims, you need to fit that, so as not to waste your own time and the time of the reviewers and the editors. Okay, so next slide. we're at the end with 10 minutes. So I think there's 5 minutes for questions. The Padlet there, a link is just, I've put a few just things that I find I've developed over the years to help. And so you're welcome to go and have a look at that. One of the things that I haven't talked about, but I've got a template that I developed that was, you can use it for identifying evidence types and evidence sources for different, the different criteria within the AAUT rubric, including against each descriptor. And so that's actually quite helpful, I think, just as a kind of a discussion exercise with a group of you. I've also put in the Juttle paper, the idea arc model for effective research questions. I really recommend that paper. When I read it, I felt very sad that it hadn't been written when I was starting my PhD. And it's also got the Impel ladder in it, I think, and the AAUT descriptor. So hopefully that's useful. Anyway, we can stop sharing and see our faces and ask me questions. Thank you. I know I'm talking. Oh, Maya, hello.
Hi, Jo. I just wanted to ask you a quick question. So I'm potentially doing a PhD looking at a specific work learning, integrated learning opportunity, and seeing sort of the holistic effects on like patient outcomes and student outcomes. And one thing I'm struggling to find is a really comprehensive and like holistic evaluation framework in the literature, which isn't very old or very I guess basic. So I was just wondering what your thoughts are on like what you think are some good evaluation frameworks which are really evidence-based.
Look, I can't answer that without knowing a bit more, but I think one thing you might consider is to have part of your research plan that you will evaluate the evaluation frameworks and propose your own.
Thank you. That's a really excellent idea. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Well, I mean, if you've been looking and there's this obvious gap, there's no good evaluation framework. So that's a PhD, just that.
Yeah, I think so too. It's a lot of work, but we'll see what happens. Thank you so much.
You could have a look, like, because there would be other evaluation frameworks from other disciplines, and you could have a look at them and see what there are, do like a meta-analysis, I guess, and see what are the key, qualities of an evaluation framework that would work for your context. And you would also need to do some, I guess, data collection to see, well, what is actually wanted in an evaluation framework. So there might be some papers or things saying, we're not evaluating this very well, or we can't actually measure that because we don't have it in a framework. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stacey. So we've got 5 minutes, and I know that it was Sue's had to go. So are there any other questions, or would we like to just do the finishing up bit?
What we can do, Jo, is I can just announce that our next session is yet to be confirmed. And so stay tuned on LinkedIn or HERDSA notices, or wherever you usually find out about us if there's another place. And we'll be announcing that soon. We're just trying to finalise the last details before we can say who it is. So that'll be very soon. And then I'll hand back to Jo, and you can kind of finish out the last 5 minutes if you want to, if there's questions remaining.
Okay, thanks. One thing I can tell you is, so the ASHRAE editors, we are planning to do a seminar getting ready for HERDSA, but the purpose of our workshop seminar is to invite people who have an abstract submitted and accepted to work to join us and to think about how to translate their abstract into a paper. So like a practical, hands-on, do some writing, but really structured to help you go from abstract to paper, because it's the problem with writing an abstract without a paper is it's often very difficult to then put it into a paper. It's kind of, if I'm writing a paper, I often write the abstract kind of a bit, but it's usually the last thing that I write properly. But when you're submitting to a conference, it's just the abstract. So that kind of thinking through what does each sentence in the abstract mean in terms of how I write an introduction, how I do the literature review, how I write up the method, how I do the results, and then the discussion. That's quite a big leap. And so we're hoping to provide an online opportunity for people to work through that with some support. That'll be in May. Yeah, so look out for it. So any further questions? Thank you, Tracy.
Jo, Jo-Anne, I have a quick question. That's okay.
Yeah.
I'm in a kind of strange space at the moment where I've had a lot of collaborations kind of get started. And so I've had a lot of these opportunities come up. And so now I feel like I'm spread a bit too thin across different SoTL projects. Do you have any kind of general advice for how to balance the sort of, you want to build collaborations and that brings opportunities versus developing a really coherent, this is my expertise?
Yeah. Look, I think it's quite tricky, and it's a little bit part of your temperament, how you do it. Like I'm pretty much take up every opportunity because you don't know which ones will bear fruit, and so you don't want to say no to something that later on you really wish you had said yes to. But then balancing that with being strategic, and so I think perhaps the thing would be to sit down and do your personal research plan. Which, so, a 3 to 5 year plan, this is what I'm interested in. These are the sort of questions that I want to answer. And then have a plan of, maybe be proactive in seeking out opportunities, inviting people to do your own projects with you that you lead. But also, something that is good. There's a saying, don't let the good be the enemy of the best. I'm not totally on board with that saying, but I think there is a wisdom in being able to say no. Just because it's good to do doesn't mean that you should do it. And so it's about having, if you know what you want and it's written down, you're free to change your mind. Like it's not a promise, but having plans helps you to make decisions that are more about, well, even for the sake of the people you're joining, can I be a good contributor? Yeah.
Thanks so much for that. I think in the interest of time, we might try and wrap it up for today. There has been a sort of some interest in the chat though to hear more about these non-traditional sort of research outputs and how ASHA is going with that. So we might get some more information from you, Jo-Anne, and then share that with the group. But again, just a final thank you for your presentation and your discussion today. It's obviously sparked a lot of interesting things that we'd like to follow up on. So thank you so much for giving us your time today. And we'll close out the session.